In this session about building resilience for a changing world, we are joined by international resilience expert, Dr. Erika Seville and Dr. Tracy. And what we will do in this session will be to share insight and experience on how you, your teams, and your organization, as well as our communities, can become more resilient. With years of experience researching and supporting organizations through times of crisis, Erika and Tracy will be talking about practical strategies for performing well under pressure, obviously, of a crisis, as well as better ways to plan and prepare for an evolving future. So let me quickly introduce Erika. Erika is an executive director of resilience organizations, as well as a commissioner on the board of New Zealand's natural disaster insurer, the Earthquake Commissions, and she is also chair of the Response and Recovery at URA, New Zealand. It is a consortium tasked with building New Zealand's response and recovery leadership capability. Erika is author of the book Resilient Organizations, which is about how to survive, thrive, and create opportunities through crisis and change. She is widely published in academic journals and has led numerous large collaborative research programs focused on resilience. We are fortunate to have Erika, who has also led major research efforts tracking the impact of disaster on the business community and the process of recovery. Thank you. Welcome, Erika. And we are also joined by Tracy, who is the Joint Managing Director of Resilient Organizations, a research and consulting group specializing in risk and resilience based in Christchurch, New Zealand. Tracy has carried out a broad range of risk and resilience projects, including risk preparedness, plans and exercise, business continuity programs design, emergency management training and development, capability assessment, as well as crisis event review, along with research into a broad range of risk and resilience issues. She has published several articles, both in academic publication as well as short user guides, and she's also co-creating the content for Atlas, Ready for Business, a free disaster resilience app for smaller and medium enterprise internationally. Again, we are really, really privileged to have both Erika and Tracy with us.
Look, thanks so much for that introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to talk with you all today in the week leading up to Christmas. I thought I might just start by sort of first off kicking off and telling you where Tracy and I are from, because this is a particularly global audience, and New Zealand is a tiny little country at the bottom of the world. So some of you may be familiar with us, but others of you not. So we're down in the South Pacific, sort of jammed in between Australia, a bit off to the side of Australia, right at the bottom of the world. Or depending on your perspective, you could say we're near the top of the world, because who says the world has to be oriented that way? So what Tracy and I are going to talk about today is resilience, particularly focusing on resilience, thinking about it from an organizational perspective and how you might be able to think about growing the resilience of your organization and what that takes in today's business world, but also how your organization sits within a complex system and how resilience needs to be grown across that system. It's worth framing the talk, though, sort of in terms of how we have come to the challenge of resilience. And New Zealand really sets the context for us, because New Zealand is a very geologically active country, and that's what makes it so beautiful. But it also means that we are highly prone to earthquakes, flooding, landslides, lots of natural disasters. And so resilience is a real challenge for a country like New Zealand. But really, my first thought on resilience came from when I was part of a New Zealand reconnaissance team that went to Thailand following the Boxing Day tsunami, and particularly looking at the challenges for those communities in both the immediate response and the recovery phases following that event. And we got particularly interested in looking at the business community and how that community both responded and how they collaborated together to effect an economic recovery for their communities. From that, we applied to the New Zealand government for a major 6-year research program to try and understand how can we grow the resilience of New Zealand organisations. And this is a picture of a New Zealand business on the west coast of New Zealand that had a tornado that particularly ripped through it. And you can see took its roof off. And what was incredible was that this business was able to be back up and operating the following day, filling a major export order for one of their key clients. And so the question we set ourselves was really to try and understand before an event, how do we try and predict or try and understand which organisations are likely to prove to be resilient in the face of disruption and crises, and which ones might struggle, and what we could do to actually help New Zealand businesses to become better prepared. As part of that work, we've been involved in research looking at disasters around the world, in particular, so this is the Sichuan earthquake in China, looking at the response and recovery process there. And then about 10 years ago, in 2010, gosh, so that's more than 10 years ago now, that's about 12 years ago now, our home city of Christchurch, New Zealand was struck not by one, but by a sequence of earthquakes. We actually had about 10,000 earthquakes over the course of about 18 months that devastated our central city. It was a major earthquake that struck that was quite shallow and struck very close to the central business district. And so that through that, suddenly our own home city became a living laboratory where we were able to look at, which businesses and what strategies businesses were using that enabled some of them to be able to take this immediate crisis and turn it into a source of opportunity, while others struggled to see that window of opportunity, and turning from that some tangible advice for businesses that they can use both before an event, during and after, to actually try and maximize their recovery potential following disruption. We've collaborated closely with the Australian government, getting a New Zealand and Australian perspective and a model of resilience, particularly working with them, focusing on critical infrastructure providers and their building their resilience. And we've done a lot of work in New Zealand focusing on disasters that haven't yet happened. So this is a shot of Wellington, which is New Zealand's capital city. And the red line there is a major Wellington fault line. So when that Wellington earthquake happens, that will be a very devastating event for our capital city, Wellington. So we've done a lot of economic modelling, particularly to help critical infrastructure providers understand how best to invest, how to prioritise and how to stage that investment to get the best resilience uplift that we can over time. So basically through that, that's us in terms of resilient organisations. So we're a very small team, but we focus on doing both fundamental research, but also practical, providing practical support for organisations around New Zealand and around the world to actually improve their resilience. Working not just with the private sector, but also with government organisations and NGOs, those working in the charitable sector, to see if we can get those organisations better prepared to withstand disruption, because getting our organisational community more resilient means creating more resilient communities, and that's one of our core purposes. So really, the world today, the term VUCA was thrown around in the research world probably a good 15 years ago. This term sort of came out and was commonly being used by researchers. VUCA being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I don't know about you and where you are, what it's like where you are around the world, but certainly within New Zealand, VUCA is no longer a concept, it is our current reality. And our businesses are having to find ways to be able to perform well within a VUCA environment. And so really that's why the concepts of resilience are coming to the fore. They're not just for times when there is a sudden disruption like a major earthquake or a major disaster, but actually organizations are having to bring to the table all of their resilience capabilities just to thrive in this VUCA world where actually change is the new normal. And if I think about our future, it's certainly not likely to become any less VUCA. If anything, the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity is accentuating and is likely to increase as time goes on. So these resilience characteristics are going to become all more important. So, as I said, we've done a lot of fundamental research that was sponsored by the New Zealand government to try and understand what resilience looks like for an organisation, looking across different kinds of organisations and trying to see if there are some indicators that we can look at for an organisation during peacetime and try and understand what the strengths or weaknesses that organisation might have when it starts to face adversity. And through that research, we identified 3 key attributes that contribute to an organisation's resilience. And from that, the research built 13 different indicators. And the value with these indicators is that you can use them to actually evaluate your organisation in the day-to-day. You can evaluate it today and try and understand what your organisation's strengths and weaknesses are likely to be from a resilience perspective. And you can also use those tools to then reevaluate your organisation over time, because resilience is a bit like fitness. If you don't keep working on it, if you don't keep investing in it, potentially your resilience could erode. And every time you do a restructure or you lose some key staff, the resilience profile of your organisation will change. So resilience is a very dynamic aspect for an organisation. But if we take it at its simplest level, these 3 key attributes of an organisation's resilience. The first one is around an organisation's leadership and culture. And they say that disasters or crises or adversity brings out the best and the worst in people. Essentially, it's the same for your organisation. If your organisation has invested in a strong leadership and a good culture throughout your organisation, that's a really good foundation for helping your organisation to get through times of crisis. Networks and relationships is also very important for your organisation. Essentially, this is a bit like your organisation's social capital. It's the friends and the support network that your organisation can call on for support during times of crisis. We often talk about these as 3 a.m. friends. When the proverbial hits the fan, can you actually call one of your key suppliers in the middle of the night? A, when they see your number flash up, will they answer the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning? And B, would they be prepared to get out of bed and help you in solving the crisis that you're currently facing? So really looking at that system-wide resilience and how your organisation is operating in the day-to-day, that means whether or not that support will be there for them in times of crisis. And the third attribute really is around being change ready. And this is as much about mindset as it is about the plans and the strategies that are put in place to enable your organisation to approach change and seek the opportunities that come from change. So, some key principles around how to thrive in this VUCA world. And I'm going to give you 4 sort of key principles, and then Tracy's going to provide some different examples around how you might be able to think about putting in some strategies for your organisation to actually grow resilience. So the first principle is really it's about managing the risks that are knowable. So this is a photo that was taken immediately after the Christchurch earthquakes in New Zealand back in 2010. And this guy in the photo was actually quite a prominent lawyer in New Zealand. And you can see that one of his first instincts was to grab the hard drives. Gosh, they don't really look like that anymore. But he walked out of his building carrying his company's hard drives. Now, back in 2010, we'd all been told about the importance of backups, having offsite backups. Cloud computing wasn't really there, but even still, this guy, the first thing on his mind after that earthquake should not have been the need to be carrying out the hard drives from his building. And so I think the very first principle is to actually make sure that your organization is doing the basics. There are a series of risks, there's a series of good practices that many organizations are simply not doing. And I ask you, what do you want to be doing on the first 2 days after the earthquake? Do you want to be running around scrambling to see if you can find all of the contact details for all of the people you're needing to support your organization's recovery? Or do you want to be sitting down in a room actually being able to strategize and thinking about getting your organization's feet back on the ground? So by not doing the little things, it's just creating a mental load, I guess, for your organization to have to deal with. So, and often the little steps that you're needing to put in place, they aren't the expensive steps either. It's just having the discipline to go ahead and actually do them. So managing the risks that are knowable is very important, doing the basics right. The second principle, though, is that actually life never fits the plan. So a resilient organization is all about expecting the unexpected. That the risk that wasn't on your risk register is probably going to be the one that bites you. And what we see in really resilient organizations is a mindset of constantly thinking, what if? And that's as much about creating the plans for the what if as it is about having an openness of mind into how things could potentially unfold. So organizations that do this well tend to do quite a lot of strategic planning. That they're basically taking risk management approaches and operationalizing them, thinking how might this unfold at both a strategic and at an operational level. So doing the what ifs constantly in your organization, always having a plan B in case something goes wrong. The third principle is around practice, practice, practice. And you might wonder why I've got a picture of an iguana up there. I know that doesn't really fit with the words, but the reason why we need to practice, practice, practice our responses to times of adversity is because as soon as something goes wrong, physiologically, we have adrenaline starts to course through our body. And as soon as the adrenaline starts to course through our body, our brain starts to kick in and we start thinking about using the amygdala more, which is sometimes called our lizard brain, which means that we revert back to instinctive responses, which could include fight, flight, or freeze. So thinking about your staff and how they might respond to times of high stress, if you need your staff to be doing certain responses, you need to have practiced that with them in advance so that it is automatic. This is the reason that we do fire drills twice a year and why it's legislated that we do them. Well, in New Zealand, it's legislated that we do them on a regular basis because people need to have the link that when they hear that fire drill, they instinctively know what to do. They don't have to think about it because as soon as we have the lizard brain come to the fore, our ability to think through complex problems reduces. So we need to automate some of those responses. And once you've got action happening, then your organization can start thinking about how the complex challenge of what does this mean, situation awareness, what are our priorities, and how do we deal with it? So by practicing and by putting plans in place, what you're trying to do is to simplify things down for people to reduce the adrenaline load so that people can actually be at their best and to think through the complex problem of what is important, what do I need to do next, what does this mean for the future of my organization, and therefore, what do I need to be starting to do now in terms of getting recovery happening? And that only occurs through practice, practice, practice. And really, it comes down to these two things, that resilience has two elements to it. There's a planned aspect to resilience, which is having all of your emergency, your business continuity plans, your disaster recovery plans, having those and practicing them so they run like clockwork. But there is also an adaptive element to resilience, which is that the crisis I've never seen it fit the plan perfectly. There's always curveballs, always things that come out from left field. So we need to have our people actually able to perform at their best in those environments. And you wouldn't expect people to perform well in any task without giving them the opportunity to practice and hone their skills. So why do we do it when it comes to organizational resilience? Everyone needs practice. The final principle really that we that came through from the research is about using windows of opportunity. And when we have our definition of resilience, we say that resilience is the ability to not only survive, but to thrive through times of crisis. Survival is a prerequisite for resilience, but survival alone is not enough. A resilient organization needs to find ways to capture the opportunity that comes with crisis. And I mean, there's a saying, I think it was Winston Churchill that said, never let a good crisis go to waste. And organizations need to be thinking about this, that really one of the things to do when disaster strikes is to pull off the shelf that long-term strategic plan and say, what did we want to achieve over the next 10 to 15 years? And is there an opportunity now to fast track this? Because your world you never recover back to the environment that there was before the crisis. Things always change. And it's often very difficult to affect change in an organization when the sun's shining and the sea is calm. Actually, crises can be an opportunity to fast track change. And we often see organizations that come through a crisis and 5-10 years later, they look back and the ones that were able to seize the moment actually see that that was potentially the making of their organization. So we've got a couple of little poll questions here for you to think about. So if we can start the poll, and I'll sort of talk through the question. So the question is really, which of these are the area of greatest strength for your organization? Which is the aspect that you feel that your organization is doing very well? Managing the risks that are knowable, expecting the unexpected, ensuring that your organization does regular practice, or having the capability to use the windows of opportunity that change create, or none. My organization does all of these poorly. If there's one that you think that your organization does particularly well, if you can click on that. Okay, so managing the risks that are knowable, but there are quite a few organizations out there who are doing none of these particularly well. So the second question that I have for you is, which of these areas are the greatest weakness for your organization? So again, it's the same 4 options, but the 5th one is none. My organization does all of these well. So we'll see if anyone manages to click on that one. Okay, so coming through pretty clearly, actually. Expecting the unexpected. So having that strategic thing of constantly not thinking that you can plan your way out of everything, that actually there will be surprises and curveballs, and building in that capability within the organization to actually do it, and ensuring regular practice. And I think that's really important, because so often only a small team within, particularly in large organizations, tends to be involved in all of the crisis and emergency planning, but actually we need everyone to know what their role will be when adversity strikes. So Tracy, I'll hand over to you to start thinking about resilience at different levels within a community.
Thanks, Erica. So resilience is a big word. It's used to mean a lot of different things. And I think it's really important to note we're talking about organizational resilience. But resilience applies to individuals, to teams, to communities, to your family. So when we start talking about trying to improve resilience and try and do something, it's really important that we think about the resilience of what and to what. Pretty likely, if you go and talk to your people and culture team and mention the word resilience, they're immediately going to switch on to the concept of individuals' resilience. And that's really important, but not what this talk is actually about, which is at the organisation. But we're going to step through thinking about individuals, teams, and organisations, and some of the things that you could actually take away and try and do to make some change in this for your organisation. Next slide. Control. So individual resilience is really important. You can't have a resilient organisation if every single constituent person within it is not resilient. But equally, having very resilient people does not equal a resilient organisation. There's the processes, the culture, the context that need to be added to those individuals. During any crisis and before any crisis, helping people to be individually resilient is, of course, really important and really beneficial. And of course, through the last few years of the pandemic, we've seen a lot of effort get invested by organisations into that space. But unfortunately, helping people to personally work on ways to well-being doesn't help if the organisation then overloads them constantly or bullies them and erodes their resilience. So there's an interaction there that's important to understand. So building individual resilience in a time of crisis, maybe some of you guys will be the leaders leading your organisation through something disruptive. Tip one is to make sure that you reach out rather than hunker down. When we get overloaded and that lizard brain that Erica's talked about kicks in, we often tend to kind of burrow into ourselves and triage and just try and deal with what's in front of us. It's a really important time where you're actually reaching out, using groups of people around you, swarm leadership, and reaching out to people to help you with what is going on and to keep perspective. These are the 3 AM friends that may be actually able to help you with an organisational problem. They may simply be the shoulder that you need to vent on or cry on so that you can go back and present the solid front to the people that you are leading. Reframing, this links to Erica's talk about the window of opportunity. Yes, this is hard. Yes, this is difficult. The pandemic was truly awful for many people at many times. But if we can reframe to acknowledge that, yes, that's hard and it's tough, but also that there are opportunities in there as well, and help us to try and see the positive and think in the medium to the longer term future about what might lie ahead for us. And lastly, understanding the roller coaster. There will be shit days. Sorry, excuse my language. There will be good days. There will be bad days. It is a roller coaster. There is a lot of research to tell you about a particular cycle post any crisis, post a disaster, of hope and optimism and excitement, where everybody is pulling together and working to try and solve this, and then a slippery slope down into a period of despair and despondency. That can repeat many times, sometimes just reframing to understand you're on a roller coaster, you're at the scary moment, but it doesn't last for too long. All just wee tips and tools to help you. And then, of course, you may be in a position to be trying to help your teams to see the world in that way as well and help you to get through. Thinking about team resilience, what the research shows us is that middle managers play an incredibly crucial role in both creating resilience before an event and in helping an organisation to not just survive but thrive post an event. Middle managers are often underinvested in organisations, but have a huge amount of power to either buffer their team from non-optimal behaviours from above. They can also completely neuter the great things that senior leadership in an organisation might be doing to support employees that stop at the middle manager's desk. So they're this conduit between the senior and often the shop floor as such workers. They're incredibly important and they're carrying a lot of strain as well. So they are often care deeply and are trying to support their team and their team's individual circumstances and performance, whilst getting demands from above Really important to give them a lot of support. Really important that they are given training as well, and that practice. That middle managers will be a lot of the people getting stuff done when something goes wrong for your organization. Even just the opportunity for them to be part of those what-if discussions prior to an event to get their head around what their role may be can help them to feel prepared for when that adrenaline hit comes. Something bad has happened, but that's okay. Hey, we talked about this. Oh, there's a plan somewhere, right? Let me have a look at that. And I've got this really solid team that we can work together. The other part about team resilience is what people remember. What people remember is doing what is right and what is focused on people. There can be an incredibly long tail of not doing the right thing at the right time that can impact on an organization's recovery over an incredibly long time. This can be as simple as whether you checked if your staff were okay after a flood or a landslide or an earthquake. Not reaching out as the manager or the leader to check that they're okay can sour the engagement of that staff member for the next 5 to 10 years. Of course, in this world of social media and rapid dissemination of information, the community will remember whether you do the right thing. And of course, these really important potentially for those of you who may be speaking to the media or framing your company's communication in this time of crisis, to have thought in advance about what the crucial principles are, particularly around being open and honest and transparent and leading with empathy. And that's leading with empathy in your messages to your teams and your staff, as well as to the community that is impacted. And then looking at the overall behemoth of the organisation, one of the really common problems that we see a lot is a failure of an organisation to recognise that they are in a crisis, and a using of typical business as usual processes, structures and decision making, when actually they should be going, we're in a crisis and we need to do this differently, quicker, better, and we need to involve more and diverse people in our decision making. Often they may not realise until it is too late that this is a crisis. Really important to get ahead of it. Really important to be proactive and give your teams the license to flag to you that they think something might be becoming a big problem. And for you to not punish the messenger as such, and to acknowledge and thank them for doing it, and build this culture where we're all alert for these signals of bad news coming. Pandemic's a good illustration there. You'll probably all be aware that there were companies that were a good couple of months ahead. This might become a very big deal. And there were companies that were scrambling and out buying emergency laptops 2 days before countries started placing restrictions on populations. Practice forward projection and scenario planning is something that you need to do both before a disaster. So this is Erica's point about what if. Always just thinking, what if? What's our plan B? What if this happens? You also need to do that, most importantly, during a crisis. And this is where a lot of organisations go wrong as well. They think they know what the situation is. Therefore, we can apply our usual business processes of this is our situation and this is our plan. Need to be doing a lot of what if thinking at that time as well, to try and stay ahead of your competitors about what might be coming next. Humans are notoriously bad at forecasting. Okay, we've got all of these decision-making biases that come in to how we process information, bearing in mind this is at the same time that our lizard brain is firing adrenaline to us and we're not doing our best thinking and decision-making. We need a team, preferably sitting quietly in a quiet area in a corner, thinking about what might happen next, because that is where the window of opportunity can often be found, is in having the time to reflect on what might happen next and what might happen next after that. And of course, what might we do to position ourselves to be ready for that? Third thing about building organisation resilience is break down those silos. You've all got them. Every organisation, even a small one, has silos. They are a necessary way to divide work up to get done. They are incredibly unhelpful when we're in a crisis and we need large amounts of people to pull together to achieve the same thing. There's also often in some silos some incredibly capable and talented people who may have some very awesome ideas to help your organization get through. But if they're just sitting out there in their silo that their job is just to look after something else, you'll never get the benefit of those ideas. So anything and everything you can do in your day-to-day workplace to break down those silos is really important. It's become even more challenging in a post-pandemic world where we have a lot of remote working. And obviously, that has got some real benefits, but it also has some real downsides in terms of increasing that siloed feeling, where I don't relate to my organization, I relate to my team within the organization. And that is where my loyalty lies. So I'm not suggesting it's easy to do, but there are lots of small ways when you're making decisions in your organization that you can think, will this increase siloation or will it decrease the way we work in silos? Actively seeking the opportunity, just can't stress this one enough. We're not talking about benefiting from the misery of others either. We are just talking about how can we change and pivot and adapt to the circumstances that face us in a way that leaves us and our people best positioned to thrive into the future. Next slide. Very last, but certainly not very least, as organisations play a crucial role in the building the resilience of the community in which they play a part. Excuse me. Crises can be very special times. An organisation that works together with the community to provide support will benefit from a huge amount of loyalty and goodwill for years or decades into the future. Building that social capital with your community is crucial. Here in New Zealand, a hospital was the only place in a town with Wi-Fi functioning. So a large number of people came and camped outside the front doors in order to use the internet. They faced a choice. Well, we're paying for it. It's our internet. Why should everybody else be using it? Go away. Or, yeah, please, welcome. Oh, and here's a charging station so that you can use our generator to charge your devices as well. Very sensibly, they went with that latter option. The goodwill that built for them is absolutely crucial. Of course, in America, Walmart is the classic case used, who built an incredible amount of goodwill in the actions that they took following a hurricane was. So crises can be these very special times where we all come together. Fail to see that there is a place for an organisation in doing that could cost you your future. There will always be winners and losers from any disaster. We can't make that go away. We can act with empathy towards those that have lost. And we can obviously apply principles of social justice in terms of we can't fix that problem for people, but we can support it. Now that goes particularly for supporting your employees who are members of that community. Some of them may require more support than others. And that's okay. It doesn't have to necessarily always be a one-size-fits-all in terms of how you approach working with your community to support everybody to get together. The BYO pub, post any kind of crisis or event, any opportunity to get together for people to be able to just share their stories, their experiences is incredibly important. Now, this again is one of our pandemic problems, is that when we're in a crisis and we're all facing incredible uncertainty and the lizard brain is going full bore, the ability to connect to other people and just share how we're feeling and understand that everybody is in this together is incredibly important. Very hard to do remotely. Any forums that you can use to do it's very important. Any crisis that hits your organisation, it could be as simple as and unfortunate as the death of an employee in the workplace. Providing those opportunities for people to get together and share their grief and their experience, incredibly valuable. Hence why this community created their own pub, a hotel to come together and have a drink and be able to share their stories in the community. And look, the lucky last, so that we can move to questions very shortly, is the long tail of recovery. Depending on the event and depending what's happened to your organisation, this is not something that's done and dusted with a couple of months later. Even if the physical impacts of whatever occurred have been dealt with, Recovery takes a very, very long time. And as Erica has said, and I just want to reiterate how important it is, we are not recovering to what was before. We are rebuilding towards some kind of new normal in a changed world. If you can keep that messaging from day one of your crisis, that will be helpful. Over to Erica to sum us up.
Excellent. Thanks, Tracy. And I just suddenly thought BYO might be a New Zealandism. So if it is, it means bring your own. So it was a pub where everyone brought their own alcohol and everything else that came with it. So look, in summary, there are these 5 key areas, and it's important for you to think about which of these areas your organization is doing well, which are the work-ons, and there are some practical ways that you can grow your organization's resilience, but you need to be working across all 5 of these areas. Taro, over to you for some questions.
Thank you so much.
They're easy ones.
Yes. Thank you so much, Erica and Tracy. Of course, I will decide to who to give the questions, right? So when it is easy, where does it go? Is it Erica or Tracy?
All the hard ones go to Tracy.
This has been a great session, really. I mean, I was listening and so on. Some of the quote, resilience is fitness. You need to invest into it. There is the notion that survival alone is not enough, right? Things always change. Crisis is an opportunity to fast track. Middle manager plays a major role. Failure to recognize that we are in crisis is a big no-no. We should not be punishing the messenger, and you go on. This has been incredible as a session, so thank you for sharing. Let's go with the first question that we had, and that question is coming from Bernardo Tolosa. And Bernardo is asking, really, how to prepare for an unexpected situation. It sounds like a tricky question. I know you were providing some nuggets there regarding what to do and so on. Can you maybe, in a quick summary, how to prepare for what is unexpected?
Tracy, I've done most of the talking already, so why don't you kick off?
On to you, great, Tracy.
Yeah, it's a great question. And if we think back to that, suggesting that there's sort of 13 indicators of resilience, there's a lot of different ways that you can start to try and do that. Really, what you want to do is you need people who are adaptable. And often our organizational processes and structures and how we get stuff done doesn't build the adaptability of people. It puts them into boxes and tells them you do it this way. So they are going to struggle to respond to something completely unexpected and unplanned for. So I'd point, that's the first thing, is that the way your organization operates and whether it encourages people to be and build their adaptability, which is, a little bit of innovation, a little bit of creativity, and a little bit of empowerment about whether they are empowered to change the way that things get done.
And look, I'd follow up with that by saying that sometimes I think we overcomplicate it as well. Like if you're in a large multinational, the likes of Coca-Cola or whatever, they will have people who have experience in this, and there's lots on the internet in terms of how to build plans and what best practice looks like. But if you're working with a small organization, that can actually feel really overwhelming. So one of the things that I'd start with is doing a what if Wednesdays. So every Wednesday, put on a lunch for your team, and they come in and they have a shared lunch, so they get to socialize with each other, and say to them, what if we came into work tomorrow and the IT system had fallen over? What would we do? What would our first steps be? And you get people to talk it through, and you come up on a whiteboard with a basic plan. The next week you say, what happens if our key supplier suddenly can't deliver this really crucial piece of equipment for us, for 3 months? What would we do? And so you're actually building plans really simply, but more importantly, you're involving in your training and you're practicing your staff to think, yeah, it's not rocket science. I think sometimes we overcomplicate it, and actually it's just about problem solving, but problem solving in a unique time-pressured way. And the more that you can get people thinking that actually everyone needs to be in the room, that the receptionist, that the person from accounts, that the marketing team, they've all got ideas to bring to the table. And actually the organization does better when we break down those silos and we get everyone to problem solve together. I think it's actually quite simple to involve people to actually build some strategies to deal with the unexpected.
Wonderful. I mean, I have one here. You know, when we were during the pandemic, I mean, it's still there was one thing that was happening, because you said something very important for me. You said really things always change, right? And if we take that, when we were in the middle of a pandemic, at the beginning, of course, there was, I mean, you don't need to wear a mask. That was the message. And then all of a sudden you need to wear a mask. All of a sudden, maybe you need to have a social distance, 2 meters. There was a point at some point, let's say, regarding the vaccine, starting with maybe AstraZeneca being published, and then all of a sudden, some countries starting pulling out of AstraZeneca. Let's say not, I mean, some were using it, some people were not using it, and I mean, and you got that constant changing. And the leaders didn't have all the answers, so they were reacting to what was coming, and they were changing their stance as new things were coming, new events were coming, and so on. But then I noticed that the citizens, at least the people that I was talking about, were not happy about it. They were seeing the leaders as flip-flopping or changing positions. So it was quite interesting for me, because I felt they were doing sometimes the right thing because they didn't know the answers, and they couldn't actually hang to one position. And those who were tending to hang to one position tend to get it wrong in the long term. So how do you manage that? Let's say I'm a leader of my organizations, I'm getting new data, I need to share it, but at the same time, my people will see that I'm wishing like flip-flopping. What is the recipe there? Like, if you may help us there, because I saw that happening with many public servants, where people were charging them for changing their position.
I think one of the big flaws is that leaders think they have to present themselves as having the definitive answer. I think that actually their followers will forgive them for not having it. And the simple mantra of always communicate what you know, what you don't know, what you're doing about it, and what you need other people to do about it would have helped those leaders. So rather than definitive statements, you will do this from now on, it's we know that it's not clear whether this is good practice or not. We're going to look into this further. In the meantime, we suggest maybe this is probably the best thing to do, but we might change our mind. So they're communicating with a degree of uncertainty, still telling people what needs to be done, but allowing that people can cope with uncertainty. They have more difficulty coping with fake certainty that is then backtracked upon. Erica, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it also points to that during, we've talked quite a bit about the cycles that happen during a response and a recovery effort, and that it's a roller coaster, and recognizing that there are many different styles of leadership that fit, and actually a leader needs to be quite agile, and the leadership that people need in the immediate aftermath of a big event when fear and uncertainty is at its greatest might be different to the style of leadership that is required further down the recovery track. So often we see leaders who it's quite empowering to be the leader, a command and control type leader during the initial response. And often we see leaders hold on to that style for too long into the recovery, when actually they need to give power back to the community and move to a more collaborative style of leadership. So recognizing that there is no one style of leadership through it, and actually you will need to evolve your leadership style to meet the needs of the situation and what people are looking for at that time. And when we talked about the things that people remember, it's that trust and confidence in you as a leader is the important thing. So making sure that you're not providing false confidence just so that you look good as a strong leader in that time, because that erodes your ability to be the good leader 3-4 months down the track once you've eroded that trust and confidence.
Wonderful. And let me bring a question that I see a lot as well, because when we talk about resilience and resiliency, of course, people wonder, and this question is coming from Armando Camino, and he says, is there a quantitative method to measure uncertainty with, let's say, coefficient of variation, standard deviation, average, and so on? So, because sometimes you said we need to prepare. How do we know that we've prepared? Can we measure it? Of course, knowing that it is uncertain at the same time. I mean, you said that the tough one goes to Tracy. So I'll give this one to Tracy then.
Yeah, no, because my short answer is no. See if Erica can improve upon that one.
Yeah, look, I think using those resilience indicators, what we're doing is looking for strengths and weaknesses that an organization will bring to a crisis. But I think it's really important that there's not going to be one number. You're not going to be 9 out of 10 on resilience, because what we find is that organizations can perform very well to one kind of crisis, but perform very poorly to another kind of crisis. I mean, it's a bit like you think of a firefighters, you know, they deal with buildings on fire very well because that actually is their business as usual. They've practiced, they've planned for it, but they can have a perfect storm type of event, you know, that actually plays to all of their weaknesses at an organizational level, and actually they can completely misstep in a different kind of crisis, you know, that might be more of a reputational, organizational leadership sort of style of crisis. So that's why it's important to do, when we say do these what if scenarios, think very broadly about the types of situations and the types of challenges that your organization might be facing, not just the crises that you've faced in the past decade, because actually the next decade's crises will be very different. And constantly think about what are your strengths and weaknesses that you will bring to bear for these different kinds of crises, and what different kinds of responses your organization will be needing to prepare for.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you, Tracy. I think this is all we have in terms of questions. There were more questions, but of course, time is kind of pressing there. Really, really enlightening session there. And I just want to call out that there's a book that you publish, Resilient Organizations, How to Survive, Thrive, and Create Opportunities Through Crisis and Change. I mean, people can go take a look, read, because again, there was a lot of great insight that you shared today. And we are really thankful for that.